Hello everyone, welcome to Straight Talks F1. They say expect disappointment and you will never be disappointed. Well, if anyone expected that Max Verstappen won't dominate in Japan, they would have had a really bitter experience watching the Japanese GP because people should have seen this coming. Suzuka is a Red Bull track. Verstappen has nailed this track for the past 2 years. So there was little chance that he won't dominate and cruise to victory after what happened in Australia. Another 1-2 finish for Red Bull. Sergio Perez right behind Verstappen. Not a huge margin for Max, only 12 seconds ahead of Checo, but still Red Bull were relentless through the weekend. And that does not mean it was a boring race. Quite a good standard Japanese GP. Suzuka is not a track where overtaking is quite easy. It's a narrow old school track, so passing is a bit of a challenge. Despite that, we saw some beautiful overtakes, a lot of tire strategy going on, multiple pit stops, and a variety of strategies too. So it wasn't quite standard that everyone stuck to one template of strategy. So it mixed the order up really well. And in terms of the overtaking, a lot of them, and it was Yuki Tsunoda, the home hero, some fabulous overtakes from Tsunoda. And at places we won't expect, to the SS in Sector 1. That is an amazing section to drive at Suzuka, but you don't see overtakes normally at that section. So Yuki Tsunoda showing why he is the home hero and taking complete advantage of his home turf. On the other hand, his teammate Daniel Ricciardo, another race to forget, lap 1 collision with Alex Albon. It just keeps getting worse for him. And for Williams too. At this stage, Ricciardo and Williams are experiencing the worst patches of form. So I'll talk about that in detail. But besides them, we saw multiple battles in the midfield. Everyone was scrapping for points. Nobody ever looked settled and cruising to the finish. Everyone was on their toes. They had battles going on throughout the race. And out of them, Ferrari, a strategy masterclass, I would say. Often Ferrari get the flake, a lot of criticism for their strategy. They have been doing a fabulous job on that. In all of the 4 races, their strategy has been on point, and perhaps Japan was the best race strategically for them. The way they got Leclerc into the top 4, that was quite commendable. So let's unpack all of these details in this episode. Now it was given Verstappen will be dominating in Japan, but the good thing was it wasn't as ominous as last year. Last year he came to Suzuka 20-30 seconds ahead of the McLarens. It was just ridiculous. So perhaps the RB20 does not have that kind of a performance advantage as yet. Maybe because Suzuka is just the fourth race of the year this season. So not the exact comparable from last year's Japanese GP. But still there were possibilities of challenges from Ferrari and McLaren, especially in qualifying. McLaren were quite bullish on this weekend. They were hoping the fast sections of this track could suit them. Last time around, that's what helped them. They got a double podium last year. This year, perhaps they are again on the back foot at this stage of the season. So, based on the raw performance compared to Red Bull and Ferrari, McLaren did not have that kind of performance to get on the podium. And even in qualifying, that was visible. Red Bull easily locked out the front row, 1-2 finish in qualifying, and they just carried home the same in the race. And Verstappen, especially, flawless on both starts, did what he does best. There were 2 race starts, courtesy of the red flag caused by 2 of Verstappen's former teammates, Ricciardo and Albon, but that did not affect him. He was flawless as usual, nailed both of those starts, got into the lead, and comfortably won the race. And plaudits to Sergio Perez too. He is doing a commendable job. Even Helmut Marko praised him, saying that he's not trying to toy too much with his car setup. Last year he was experimenting a lot, and that sort of caused that alarming deficit to Verstappen. This year he's following what Verstappen is doing, and that's working well for him. Yes, there is still a gap between the two, but that just is due to Max's talent. So for Checo, 12 seconds is not a bad margin. It's a decent margin. if he's finishing 5-10 seconds behind Verstappen every week, every race, Red Bull would be quite satisfied with him. They don't mind if he doesn't challenge for the win every race. If he can back Verstappen up with a P2 finish and get the 1-2 finish home for the team, that is the perfect role they would expect from Sergio Perez. And of course, win the race when Verstappen can't, just in case things like Australia happen. He could not do it in Australia, so that's something Sergio Perez would want to do. But so far, he's done a fabulous job, I would say. And one more notable thing from Red Bull in terms of pit stops, 2 seconds, 2.1 seconds, all 4 of their stops for both of the drivers, they were just flawless. If they can produce 2.1 second pit stops consistently and have this kind of a performance advantage, God knows where can teams look to beat them. Will reliability be a chink in their armor, or was Australia a one-off? We'll find out, but for now Red Bull are just relentless. And we can say that Australia was perhaps an aberration. Now, credit where credit is due, Ferrari's strategy was so on point today. And in fact, it has been. It has been throughout the season in all the 4 races. If we look at it, they have done quite well on strategy. They have maximized all of their results. The only exception would be Jeddah, where Oliver Behrman was driving, and given it was his debut race and the circumstances it came in, that can be excluded. But besides that, 3-4 in Bahrain, 3-4 in Japan, 1-2 in Australia, and even in Jeddah, Leclerc got the podium in P3. So they have not messed up with their strategy. All the criticism and flake Ferrari get, I think we can subside that and appreciate that they're doing a decent job. Hopefully they can carry this on. All the Ferrari fans would keep their fingers crossed that they don't go back to their original ways of fumbling strategies when it matters. Ideally, this is Fred Vasseur taking charge and bringing about these changes that are now working and showing results. I've always said Vasseur is sort of the Napoleon for Ferrari. It always takes a Frenchman to lead a bunch of Italians and get them in the right direction. So ideally, this is the Fred Vasseur era that Ferrari get back into contention, and this is the start of it, hopefully. But talking about the strategy in Japan, Charles Leclerc, bad qualifying, starting P8, and then he effectively pulls off a one-stop strategy, puts on the medium tires during the red flag, and goes on a 25-lap stint, extends that stint. Hats off Charles Leclerc. That was some top-class stuff from Leclerc. So smart work from Ferrari to get Leclerc from P8 to P4, and it could have been an almost podium, but given Sainz was on a 2-stopper, he had better pace towards the end of the race, so it made sense they swapped positions and Sainz got the podium. But Leclerc was fabulous in terms of his racecraft, in terms of his race pace, and tyre management especially. So strategy wise, full marks for Ferrari in Japan, and hopefully they carry this on the way they have started the season. They keep maximizing these results, and ideally they would get some more wins. And once again, Sainz was their lead driver on the podium. So there's been this talk about Carlos Sainz and his comparison to Leclerc and how he's performed this season so far. He's been their lead driver. Keeping the fact aside that he was absent in Saudi Arabia, people are saying if he would have drove in Jeddah, he would have led the world championship after the last race. But he's in the form of his life. He's got a point to prove. And there are people who are saying that now we are just overselling and stretching Sainz's narrative, which does not make sense. Fair enough, Charles Leclerc has got the advantage on raw pace. He's a much more talented driver in terms of qualifying pace, in terms of raw pace in the races too. Leclerc is the driver. And yes, the data suggests that. They're qualifying head to head, even the race head to head, Leclerc leads that. So Leclerc has advantage data wise, and his past results, the head to head results speak in his favor. But at the same time, One cannot say that Carlos Sainz is an inferior driver. Time and again, Sainz has shown how he's equal to Leclerc. He's beaten him over the course of a season. Yes, people can say strategic errors, reliability issues, but those happen for Sainz too. He's made mistakes too, and Leclerc has made mistakes too. No driver's perfect, and at the same time, the way Carlos and Charles have been neck and neck with each other in terms of pace, in qualifying in the race, we haven't seen alarming deficits like we have seen in other teammate cases like Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll or Verstappen and Perez. So it doesn't really make sense how people just discount Carlos Sainz as a number 2 driver. Fair enough if people are asking the question, is Ferrari right to drop Sainz and sign up Lewis Hamilton? That's a choice by Ferrari that they want a 7-time champion. There are multiple aspects to that deal, but that does not make Carlos Sainz an inferior driver to Leclerc. Leclerc has always been the golden boy for Ferrari. He's driven for the academy, he's risen through the ranks for the team. So there are multiple aspects they would want to retain someone like Charles Leclerc, as Red Bull has done with Verstappen. And they even know Carlos Sainz is a driver, he's a survivor, he's a journeyman campaigner, a seasoned campaigner. So if they drop him, there are chances he could make another home for himself at Red Bull or Mercedes or any other team. Can Charles Leclerc do that? Certainly not. It's quite difficult for Leclerc to leave Ferrari and sign up for another team. We look at Sainz's situation, there are multiple options right now for him. For Leclerc, that's not the case. Yes, there will be a lot of teams wanting to hire Leclerc, but practically, would Leclerc fit in a McLaren? Would Leclerc fit in a Mercedes? Hypothetically, yes, we can think about those scenarios. But it would be quite difficult for someone like Leclerc to leave the Ferrari environment and go somewhere else. So I don't get this chatter around. There's been some overselling about Sainz's narrative. Sainz is a race winner. He's a fabulous driver. Yes, the driver market evaluates him as a B-lister perhaps compared to someone like a Lewis Hamilton or Charles Leclerc or Verstappen. But in terms of the championship potential, even Leclerc has 0 championships at this stage and only 5 race wins over the past 6 years. So yes, there can be all sorts of chatter about Leclerc being the better driver and this is just temporary form from Carlos Sainz. But it does not change the reality that Leclerc and Sainz have been a fabulous team pairing for Ferrari and they have been quite equal to each other. Neither of them has outperformed each other convincingly as such. They have been on relatively equal terms in qualifying and in the race. The data and the statistics don't always show the entire picture. You can look at a cricket match scorecard or a football scorecard and it won't give you the entire picture and the context of what happened in that game and how convincingly did a team beat the other or how closely was that match fought. Sport is not won on data. It is won on the field in the arena, and from that subjectivity, Sainz and Leclerc have been quite equal in the past 4 years, I would say. So yeah, after that rant about Sainz and Leclerc and Ferrari, let's get to the man who's replacing Carlos Sainz, Lewis Hamilton. He's looking for the half a second. He's looking for the half a second worth of pace deficit to Max Verstappen, and he's been looking for that since 2022. That's been the story, that's been the highlight of Mercedes in the Japanese GP because nothing else happened, nothing much to write home about after what was a disaster in Australia. They thought they would get their big redemption in Japan, and things sort of looked on the up. After qualifying, Hamilton was a bit upbeat. He said the car felt the nicest in 3 years. It gave him a good feeling, he said. But then in the race, the same thing happened. It just did not perform, it just did not have enough pace to fight in the top 5, let alone for the podium. So, a standard midfield race for Mercedes in the lower half of the points. And Lewis Hamilton, whenever he's come on the radio in this weekend, he sort of sounded given up. This is something I pointed out after Bahrain, that he may have mentally written this season off in his mind. That he knows Mercedes is not improving. So let's just write off 2024 and focus on his Ferrari future for 2025. And his radio calls, his interviews in Japan again reflected the same thing. During qualifying, he had this radio call. Where's that half a second after he asked the gap to Verstappen? Bonington telling him half a second to Verstappen, and Hamilton goes like, where's that half a second, man? Perhaps representing everybody that where is that half a second advantage that is keeping Verstappen away from everybody. And then again in the race, another unusual radio for someone like Lewis Hamilton. After like 20-25% of the race went by, he goes on the radio and says, should I let George by? This is the same Lewis Hamilton who is fighting tooth and nail for every single position, who is backing up Nico Rosberg at the 2016 finale in Abu Dhabi. This is the same Lewis Hamilton who did not back out of several clashes with Verstappen in 2021. And he's asking on the team radio, should I let George by? But yeah, I guess he's seeing the writing on the wall. He knows there is nothing much to achieve with this Mercedes car. So maybe mentally he's writing this season off. That of course he'll try to put everything into it. But at the same time he won't be much bothered if they cannot achieve anything as such. And again, overall their race ended exactly how it has been in Bahrain and Saudi. P7 and P9 for Russell and Hamilton respectively. That too, Russell overtook Piastri in the last lap to get P7. So Hamilton and Mercedes, they're just searching for that half a second. They're searching for performance desperately. And it's been 2.5 seasons now. It does not seem like they would be able to find it again this year. But yeah, that's the story for the Silver Arrows right now. Now, in terms of overtakes, this race was a buffet. So many overtakes into turn 1, through the SS in sector 1. Suzuka is not a track where overtaking is easy. It's a narrow old school track. So to see so many overtakes at Suzuka, that's quite awesome. And Yuki Tsunoda was the top guy who was overtaking the most. And in the most unlikely places where you don't see overtakes in Suzuka. To the SS in sector 1. It's an amazing section to drive, but to pull off overtakes at that section, that's top drawer stuff from Tsunoda. He was on another level, I would say. Now there are of course some classic sweeping overtakes into turn 1. That's always a sight to watch in Suzuka. Nico Hülkenberg, Carlos Sainz, Lando Norris, George Russell. Multiple drivers made some overtakes into turn 1. But Yuki Tsunoda still stands out. Reason being, he pulled off overtakes at a section where his teammate Daniel Ricciardo, who is an 8-time race winner, crashed out on lap 1 and could not get past that lap 1 chaos. Now yes, one could argue Tsunoda was making overtakes one car at a time in that section, but at the same time Tsunoda was also present where Ricciardo was at the start of the race. So it's quite ironic that Ricciardo could not get past lap 1 in Suzuka, and Tsunoda, the home hero, who has relatively less experience in F1, not even stepped on the podium yet, has produced a sensational drive in what is an underperforming RB car. But yeah, all in all, Tsunoda is having a sensational season. They say he's not the top contender, not a serious contender for Red Bull rather, if they choose to replace Sergio Perez. But he's still smoking Ricciardo. He is outperforming Daniel Ricciardo every race, every weekend. Helmut Marko has indirectly warned Ricciardo, but yeah, I'll talk about that in a bit in detail on what's going on with Ricciardo and how that crash happened, how that collision happened with Albon on lap 1. Overall, just to close off this point about Tsunoda and the overtakes, I would say if Tsunoda had to prove his racecraft, prove his talent and skills in F1, this was the kind of race he needed. A quite mature drive, well executed, his team backed him up with a good pit stop, and it earned him a crucial point. backing up his stellar performance in Australia. They need every single point given it's a cutthroat midfield right now. Teams like Haas, teams like RB, they are going to take every single point. And this P10 finish from Tsunoda and the way he drove, the way he raced today, after Leclerc, I would say he was definitely the driver of the day. For the crowd, at least for the Japanese fans, for people in Suzuka who attended the race, they definitely know that Tsunoda has done a fabulous job this weekend. And they would have enjoyed it. They would have loved cheering Tsunoda getting just that single point, finishing P10 against all odds. Now the story keeps getting worse for Ricardo and Williams. A lap 1 crash between Ricardo and Albon. Like when everyone saw a Williams in the barriers, people thought, oh, again, it's Logan Sargent. But then what we have seen over the past 2 weeks, Alex Albon has got this peeve of crashing his car, and it's happened again. It wasn't Sargent, it was Albon, and it was Ricardo with him, who's having a wretched season, to say the least. He may say that it's been a rough start and he'll get back on the pace, but Daniel Ricciardo is not in his element. So, just to run through the crash, what happened was Albon was on the inside line through the SS, through one of the S corners, and Ricciardo had Lance Stroll's car on the other side of him. So, he took evasive action to get away from Lance Stroll, but he perhaps moved too much to the right to touch Albon's front tires, and that was game over. On a narrow track where the grass and gravel are so close to the track, one such contact, one such collision, and it will be game over. That's what happened. They collided and they spun out of control, and both of them crashed into the barriers. That was it, red flag straight away. Ricardo's clearly not in his element. Yes, people can argue it was a racing incident, and there hasn't been any sort of investigation on it. It was a lap 1 incident, so it doesn't really matter. It can happen, but at the same time, Ricardo feels a bit off. And even Alex Albon, after the crash that has happened in Australia and all the things that are going on at Williams with the spare chassis, even Sargent crashed in FP1 in this weekend. But for Daniel Ricciardo, I mean, at this stage, people won't even look to criticize him because there's nothing left to criticize. His McLaren days are gone. He took a year off, then has come back with Alpha Tauri, had the accident with his wrist last year, then again came back, had a decent race in Mexico, and has started this season on a rather underwhelming note. Against an inexperienced Yuki Tsunoda, Red Bull will expect Ricciardo to lead the RB team and comfortably dominate Tsunoda. But that's not happening. And at such a stage, there is no defensibility left, I would say. Like all the excuses will run out. Ricardo definitely can say the car has issues, they can change his chassis, he's had adaptability issues with the car at McLaren. But how long could a driver be out of form, especially someone of Ricardo's caliber? So the bottom line is, I feel Helmut Marko has given him an indirect warning that he has to improve. If Daniel does not improve, I think they will swap him with Liam Lawson mid-season. Yes, it would be the second successive mid-season swap, but they got to do what they got to do, and they are not a team to be laid back about it. If they feel there is a need to change their drivers, they do not hesitate to do so. So Ricardo is perhaps on borrowed time because Liam Lawson is a talent. Red Bull know what value he brings to the table. They look up to Lawson as a driver who could partner Max Verstappen in the future maybe, and they don't want to lose someone like Lawson. In any case, Red Bull is not looking to lose Liam Lawson. So Ricardo needs to pull up his socks, or else it's going to be really difficult for him to retain his seat, let alone taking Sergio Perez's seat. Now, just like Ricardo, Williams are another team that cannot afford to have crashes. And that's the exact thing that they are not able to avoid. Logan Sargent crashed in FP1, and then Alex Albon on lap 1 of the Grand Prix is just the worst luck Williams are having right now. As if they are getting hit by Murphy's Law, everything bad that could happen, it's happening all at the same time. They have hit rock bottom, we can say, and it could even get worse. It's just awful to see a champion team like Williams struggle like this and not even able to field two cars properly in the race. They still do not have a spare chassis. The spare chassis will have to wait till Miami, which means that even for China, that is the next race weekend, Williams won't have a spare chassis. And as things stand, there is no status update on what is the status of Albon's chassis. It is crashed again. It is actually Sargent's original chassis. Sargent got the repaired Albon chassis from Australia. So both of their principal chassis have been destroyed and they have to repair them now. And that's why I say that they are getting hit by Murphy's Law, because there is just no respite for them. Worse things just keep happening again and again. It's like they just keep happening and you hit rock bottom. And of course, Williams have themselves to blame. They were the ones who did not have efficient production processes. They were tracking their car parts via Excel. So they have themselves to blame while bringing that overhaul. If the drivers are crashing out and they cannot provide a spare chassis, then nobody can do anything about it. Even they cannot do anything about it because it's not in their control. Even if it is, but they just cannot afford right now to work on a spare chassis where their main chassis is damaged badly. And of course, people won't give any sympathy to them. They can give sympathy, but at the same time, they are not going to be helping them as such. Williams are all on their own. F1 is a cutthroat world, even more cutthroat than the real world. But the same things happen. If you are down, people won't give any sympathy as such. They will, but at the same time, they will say move on and keep working. And that is the only option Williams have. They are down and out. Only they can bounce back from this situation. Nobody else is going to help them or bail them out of this situation. They have to face their own problems. So, yeah, from the macro perspective, definitely Williams is not in the best shape right now. Now, after the race, James Vowles gave an interview to F1 TV, and Will Buxton said that hope you have two cars in China. And yes, that is the brutal situation right now. We don't know if Williams will be able to field two cars in China. Yes, they've got 2 weeks, so they can repair the Albon chassis, and hopefully it does get repaired well. But when other teams are looking to bring upgrades and work on the upgrades, Williams are in repair mode. That's not a good sign for a team that would want to move up the field and perform better and not become a backmarker. This is a time they would want to manufacture their upgrades, test new upgrades. So it's an additional job work that is completely unnecessary and uncalled for, definitely. But yeah, I really hope Williams bounces back from this, because this is a tough situation. This is a very dire situation for a team like Williams, who has been a champion team in the past, and it is unfathomable how they are in this situation. So, your fingers crossed for Williams that they bounce back from this situation strongly. They get back into the fight for points like Haas is, like RB is, and take the next step rather than fighting for survival. So, good Japanese GP, I would say. A nice strategic race, multiple pit stops, great overtaking. So, that was good racing action in Suzuka. So, good one in Japan, and on to the next in China. Finally, after 5 years, F1 will be heading to China. Now, with these new cars, this is the first time F1 will be racing in China at the Shanghai International Circuit, and nobody knows what could happen. It is a complete journey into the unknown, and it's a sprint weekend. So that puts even more jeopardy into what could be a classic race weekend. China is one of those tracks designed by Hermann Tilke, one of those earliest tracks. It came on the calendar in 2004. A snaily opening section of corners, and then hard braking zones, hairpins, long straights. So Red Bull could be really supreme, but it's a race definitely to watch out for because nobody knows what could happen. It's not a given that Red Bull will perform well. They could unlock some crazy patterns over there. And again, we are going there early in the season. Will we see rainy weather or will it be dry? That will also impact how the race weekend pans out. But given there will be just one practice session and then we get into the sprint shootout, the sprint race, and qualifying, and then the race, that is going to put a lot more jeopardy. Drivers won't know how to react if something goes sideways. But yeah, Shanghai, China, it's always a fun track to watch out for. Those long straights, those hard braking zones. So let's hope China adds to the excitement of the season, where we are seeing 1-2 finishes and it's getting a bit predictable. Still, Japan added a bit of flavor. So let's hope China brings its own flavor and brings its own uniqueness after the hiatus of 5 long years. So the season is ramping up as we wait for China. So stay tuned until then.